Institute, looking at different topics. And so today we have quite an interesting presentation. It's called The Quest for Europe and Eurasia's Energy Security and Independence, Why It Matters to America. And we'll have two presentations, and then we'll have time for questions from the audience. So while you're listening to the presentation, please feel free to enter questions into the Q&A bar. And I'll, once the presentation is over, then I'll read through those questions and ask them of the two presenters. So we should have about a half an hour for presentation and a half an hour for them following up questions. So our first speaker, I'll introduce each speaker as they take the floor. The first speaker is Stephen Burns. He's the Chief of Energy and Infrastructure in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I should say, a proud PhD from George Washington University. So I'm very happy to welcome Steve back to campus in a virtual format, at least. And Steve, the floor is yours for your presentation, and then I'll introduce our second speaker when we get to him.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm glad for the opportunity to talk to you all today. I think I'll start off with a little bit of history and a discussion of the work we're doing in our region. And then I'll turn it over to Will. So, Will, if you could just go straight to the history slide, the first slide after the title slide in the deck. Again, I'm Steve Burns. I'm Chief of Energy and Infrastructure in the Europe and Eurasia Bureau at USAID. We're the bureau that provides development assistance throughout the former Soviet Union, now the westernmost former Soviet Union, and then the former Yugoslavia plus Albania. So we'll just go ahead to the map slide right there, and then I'll just speak from that slide, if you will. So yeah, thank you. Our engagement in Europe and Eurasia is driven largely, or is driving political stability, right, and economic growth, such that our development assistance partners on the periphery of arguably our largest and most important ally are strengthened, and that we're strengthening the overall Euro-Atlantic alliance. So we started in our bureau during the transition from communism, in the early 90s, and when we began work, we saw, at least in the work that I do in energy and infrastructure, it was a crumbling situation that has taken us basically a generation just to get back on track. Now, from an energy perspective, our work started as one would expect, basic service restoration, getting the power back and so on. But I think, at least within the United States, there's a misunderstanding, again, I'll say at least in my generation, right, that of what the countries we work in were like, or that there was no capability, and that everything was decrepit and or destroyed. And that's not quite correct, right? Following the transition from communism, there was an economic collapse, but the basic capacity was there. The basic technical understanding was there, at least in the energy sector. Basic design was there. The issue was really deferred maintenance, stemming from financial issues, right? The work we did was to reform organizations, and I think Will get to this because he's done a lot of this work, and to move them into the free market, and to move away from maybe from technical standards and into economic standards, and how work is done, how businesses are run, and so on. And in general, I would say our work in the region has been a success to this point. We started with 24 original partner countries, which you see on the map there. 11 of the countries, no longer receive any U.S. assistance. 22 have joined the World Trade Organization. 11 are in the European Union, and 12 have joined NATO. And that's something that we're continuing to push. And if you could go to the next slide. Right. So if you move forward to now, we're 30 years on from some of the initial engagements, say 20 years more so in Southeast Europe. OK, and what we have is a sector that's come along quite well, but one that is under threat in terms of global influence, one that is captured by the Kremlin in some countries and sought after by other actors. Now on the slide, which you will see, is just a grayed out version of our joint strategic plan. So you can find this on the internet. It's a public document. There are several areas in which we're focused, more than I could fit on the slide here. Our work is all geared towards protecting U.S. security, renewing the competitive advantage of the United States, promoting our leadership, other such things, stewardship of taxpayer funds, which we take very seriously. Within this joint strategic framework, there are several areas that our programs directly address, and those are the call outs on the box there. The first benefit that I really want to talk about, and I'll steal this from Will, right, is the collaboration aspect, right? The work that we're doing, building alliances, and building or engaging in diplomacy at a technical level. Okay, now I think in the press and so on, there's always the conversation of high level engagements, diplomatic relations between the White House and various prime ministers' offices and so on. But what I would offer is that energy reform, right, and energy security, those changes occur on a generational level. Right. And so if you look at the stronger of the countries in our region, USAID alumni dominate leadership positions throughout the energy sector. Okay. Will once said something, and I stole this talking point, and I'm going to steal it from him in this presentation as well. Right. I would challenge someone to go into any electric power utility, many of the gas utilities, or any of the energy regulatory offices, right, anywhere within the region, and find an office that is devoid of USAID branded or US branded material, because we have that long collaborative relationship, and we've brought several people from entry-level analysts up to senior ministry positions, senior positions within companies. I asked one implementer just off the cuff if they could tally how many people have advanced to senior leadership positions based on their work over the past 10, 15 years. And they were able to give me about 100 just off the cuff, which means it's just many, many, many more. We've engaged thousands and thousands of individuals. And it's at that practitioner to practitioner level where we're really building U.S. influence, where we're furthering our countries, but we're also showing the generosity of the American people. Right. So that would be one area I'd like to highlight, and maybe Will could speak more to further in his presentation. The other areas where we're engaged is building capacity to counter threats. Unfortunately, as the world is becoming more advanced, there are greater threats, and those threats are not limited to singular locations. If you look at some of the cyber attacks that have occurred in financial systems and so on, those spread globally. Right, we're seeing Ukraine being used as a test bed for cyber attacks on electric power systems. And so, what the cliche is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And so this is where our early and substantive engagement has been very critical, not only in terms of building security on Europe's borders, but also in terms of bringing lessons learned back home. So the interesting thing, when you look to the power system in the United States, it's very advanced, a lot of automatic controls and so on. And for the highly publicized substation attacks in Ukraine that brought down a distribution utility, the utility was able to get service back online within 4 to 6 hours, and was able to do that because they switched over to manual control. Within the United States, that wouldn't be quite so easy if we had cascading power failures. Right, because the system isn't run manually anymore. And I think there have been a lot of concerns back here in the US about how cyber attacks could overwhelm the capability of utility employees to bring service back online. So, again, another evidence of how some of the work we're doing translates back to the United States. So, Will, if you maybe could flip to the next slide. My disclaimer here is we hadn't asked an implementer to try to document Kremlin influence in the power sector and other critical infrastructure sectors throughout Eastern Europe. Within USAID, this is one of our focuses, is countering malign Kremlin influence. I would invite you to go to the USAID website to see some of the specifics of the program. I won't speak to the specific examples here on the slide. I'll leave those for you to read. But what I can say when you look at our region is the evidence of malign action around the section, around the region is obvious. You have frozen conflicts in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia. And those frozen conflicts, limit access to critical infrastructure assets, but at the same time, they actually threaten other assets. In Georgia, you have a breakaway region that is encroaching upon a major east-west power transmission line, a major east-west oil and natural gas transmission line, right, which ultimately goes into Turkey and supplies Europe. So these issues, become a broader threat than what they just may seem just in passing. The other areas are sweetheart fuel deals. It's easy to divide and conquer. Providing natural gas at below market prices for the sake of political support, threatening to withdraw those market or below market contracts at key times, threatening fuel shutoffs. One of the interesting things, if you look at Nord Stream 2, which is a major project that gets a lot of press, if you take a step back and look at the map, what you have there is is basically a circumvention of Ukraine, right? And so what that does is it would change the entire power dynamic within Eastern Europe writ large. So this maybe is where I can highlight, again, some of our work, some of the market development work that we do. So part of what one of our core principles of the work we do at USAID is trying to get the periphery countries into the European Union's natural gas and electricity markets. The countries are all physically interconnected. Most of them are synchronously connected within the electric power sector. But by bringing them into open and transparent competitive markets, it limits the capability for these bilateral or these sweetheart deals that occur on the side. And it's an area that does not get a lot of press. Again, I would estimate, I'm looking to Southeast Europe now. When you look at the base of the market legislation that's been done there, I would say that USAID has probably written 50 to 60% of the primary and secondary energy law that is now in place in the region. For those that actually look at European energy policy, this would be the third energy package, if that means anything to anyone that's on the list. So effectively, what sets us apart maybe from some of the other actors that are out there is that we're working to better intertie the countries, bring the people into the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, and so on. We are doing this with an eye that's longer term and in terms of building a community of nations, right? We are not seeking to leverage asset, to leverage fuel supply, and so on. So if you could move to the next slide there. The other thing we're beginning to track, and again, I won't speak to the specific examples, is the growing use of debt traps by other actors, the concentration of critical assets within ownerships of singular countries. When you look to Southeast Europe as an example, you see an awful lot of new coal power development or refurbishment. You see a lot of ports and roads and so on that are being built, with bilateral deals, with contracts that, again, could not be done in a free market basis. The interesting aspect of this, and something that might be worthy of conversation further on, is when we look to the policy that's being pushed right now out of the European Union, when we look to what the World Bank and the EBRD and others are focusing on, a lot of their investment orientation in the power sector has been towards renewable energy. Now, renewable energy is valuable. It's something that I think we all would be interested in supporting. But there are prohibitions against non-renewable lending in a lot of institutions. And so when you have countries that are trying to seek refurbishment or maintenance of base load power generation, this almost to some extent, it's an unintended consequence of pushing certain countries in the direction of China and others who are willing to offer lower cost finance without certain environmental restrictions. And it's something I think that we're trying to think through and think how to address going forward. So, Will, if you go to my last slide, I'll close out real quick as I think I'm getting to my time limit here. I highlighted several of the areas where we work. We've titled our program The Energy Bridge. I would maybe just quote the assistant administrator of my bureau from a presentation he gave at Nehru's winter policy meeting a few years ago, where he just energy independence is vital to preserving democracy in the region. Nations should be able to choose where their power comes from and how much they're willing to pay for it. If they're stripped of that choice, their entire economy and their entire government becomes fully dependent on the whims of foreign actors who may not have their best interests in mind. And I think that really speaks to the heart of the work that we're doing. Again, I spoke to the governance issue, the market development issue, free, transparent markets, building the structure and moving these countries into European markets. Reducing dependence on energy resources from single sources. Again, I'll call out Will, who will be presenting later. We have done an awful lot of work in trying to diversify the energy sectors, both natural gas and electricity, to the tune of billions of dollars of investment. And then finally, it's critical infrastructure resilience. Okay, basic infrastructure upgrades. Again, cybersecurity. We like to use the term smart grid, which becomes a catch-all. I mentioned the renewables. As we're going to institute more renewables in the region, there needs to be that command and control. There needs to be the capability for two-way power flow on the distribution networks and so on. Items that are not technologically beyond the countries where we work, but that require access to finance to do, and preferably access to credible and non-leveraged finance. So, with that, I'll stop. That's just a quick overview. I'd love to get into some more detailed questions. I hope this provided some thought. And maybe, Will, I could turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for that presentation. I just want to remind the audience that you can enter questions into the Q&A bar in the video presentation software, and I'll read out those questions at the end of the second presentation. So next up, we have William Paulin, who's the Senior Director at the United States Energy Association, where for nearly 30 years he has directed the Energy Technology and Governance Program in cooperation with the United States Agency for International Development. So Will, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And Steve, thanks for the excellent presentation. It sets this up so well. My intent here is to provide a view from the field. Steve has provided you with a very good policy overview and the context within which we're working. I want to share with you what it's like to be an implementing partner of USAID and explain to you the way in which we've affected the changes that Steve spoke of earlier. Very quickly, USEA, or United States Energy Association, is a nonprofit membership association. We are engaged in educating the public, policymakers, regulatory authorities on energy technologies and issues in the United States to improve the overall understanding of energy and sustainability. And we work extensively with our colleagues and partners in the US government to improve the use of energy and environmental sustainability internationally. We've had the good fortune of partnering with Steve's office for the better part of 30 years. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. As Steve mentioned, it's been a generational change, and we've seen a lot of positive developments from when we look back at the region, which had as a legacy of Soviet central planning and operation of the utilities. And though we've made a lot of progress, the region looks a little bit like this today. We have an aging infrastructure, both in generation, in transmission, and distribution, which is rather inefficient, and it's dirty. A lot of the generation assets in the region are characterized by the use of lignite coal, which is, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a wet coal, which doesn't burn very efficiently, produces a lot of particulate and carbon dioxide. There's a scarcity of capital in the region to replace and replenish this infrastructure. There are small and balkanized markets in the region for both electricity and natural gas, which limits the capacity of small countries such as Albania or Georgia or Bosnia to attract the investment of private independent investors to come to a market, because the market is rather small. Hence, as Steve mentioned, the need to aggregate markets and create regional markets. It's difficult in the region because the region suffers from energy poverty to a certain degree. And so the government subsidized tariffs as a means of preserving social continuity. And the region is not yet fully integrated with Europe, either electrically, physically, or from a market perspective. And as Steve mentioned, there is growing malign influence from the Kremlin and China, which captures energy decision makers and policymakers, and often forces countries into disadvantageous bargains in energy and fuel. How are we addressing these challenges that remain in the region? USEA and USAID fashioned a six-pronged attack on these issues. And here you see the program components of a project that I manage called the Energy Technology and Governance Program. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through each of them, but I'll talk generally about what do they do. And then we'll talk about some of the successes that we've been able to engender. Generally, what we're involved in doing is helping the countries of the region integrate more fully with Europe and among themselves to reduce the influence of their eastern neighbors on electricity supply and fuel supply, gas supply. And we do this by providing them with a strong component of training and capacity building, the provision of software, and ongoing sustainable technical support to create network planning models, which they use to forecast new investment in transmission, both in electricity and natural gas, that will tie them more closely together physically through their networks, and enable them through those networks to aggregate their markets together. Again, aggregating the markets being the principle for being able to attract larger private investment that will refresh the infrastructure. And not only to bring them together in trade within the region, but to more fully integrate them with the networks of Europe so that they become part of the Euro-Atlantic Alliance and they're able to trade more fully with Europe. And we're beginning to see that happen. We've done that in the region, in the region that we call the Black Sea part of Europe and Eurasia, which covers Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Georgia, Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. We have a similar project that covers the Balkans region that does this planning and integration work. We've launched another working group that does it the same for natural gas. And we're working on cybersecurity issues as well. Region, recognizing that all of this is an essential component, are essential components to improving the energy security of the region. As Steve mentioned, his office has given us the liberty to work on a generational change, and we're doing it from the bottom up by providing these skills and software and training that's needed to bring this integration of the region and integration with Europe to fruition. We've seen over the course of our work in the region, a new generation of leadership emerging. And as Steve mentioned, there's probably 30 or so people that have participated in our program alone that have risen from network engineers to the leaders of their utilities who are implementing the change that Steve and others from the bilateral and multilateral community are in terms of energy policy and integration with Europe. And an important indication of that is that we're beginning to see wholesale markets emerge across the region to replace the formerly administratively operated energy sectors that were the legacy of the Soviet and socialist utilities that we found in the beginning of our work in the 90s and 2000s. And as a result of the work that we're doing, we're seeing cross-border trade increasing, which is exactly what we wanted to see. We want to see more trade among the region and with Europe, and it's happening slowly but surely as the changes in policy, as changes in regulation is made, and as infrastructure is being built to improve the ability and to provide the superhighways of electricity and natural gas trade. And lastly, we're seeing both an embrace of renewable energy, and we're seeing questions about it. And this is a question I think that Steve mentioned in his presentation. Of course, renewable energy is an important component of energy security as it provides an inexpensive, domestically sourced form of power. But at the same time, this region is characterized by the use of these lignite older power plants, which provide very inexpensive sources of electricity, and more importantly, are essential to social cohesion because they provide employment to vast numbers of miners. And so the region has to struggle with how does it make the clean energy transition while maintaining social cohesion. And as Steve mentioned, and the threat that emerges from China to preserve the use of the lignite plants and build new coal plants. So that's one of the issues. Another area that I wanted to touch on is that I think that the success that we're seeing, especially in the field, is because we've been able to work with USAID to pioneer a new development assistance mechanism. For those of you who are students of development assistance, you'll notice that I've discussed the bottom-up approach to development, which probably dates me, but this is when I got my degree in international development. We talked a lot about the need to make change from the bottom up and meet policy change, the top-down policy change that's being implemented. We do that by, as I mentioned, providing a tremendous amount of training and capacity building, by making sure that our programs are meeting the needs of the utilities and the persons that participate in them, so that they're demand-driven, and that the counterparts that we work with contribute and provide a sweat equity through intellectual property, the provision of data, and the updating of models, and helping us with the analysis, so that once we complete the analysis of a new transmission line, either gas or electric, that needs to be built, and they've made valuable contributions to it. It's not a study that sits on the shelf. It's a study that they use and take to the IFIs and leverage our investment, and gets built and commissioned and links their countries together. And finally, we provide this technical support and supplement it with the use of American volunteers in a practitioner-to-practitioner approach that provides proof of concept when we want to introduce a new and somewhat unknown concept to the counterparts. Where's the proof? Well, the proof is that we're building infrastructure that integrates the energy community in the Europe and Eurasia region with the Euro-Atlantic community, and it's supporting regional market integration. Here's an example. We're working on two major projects that will tie the Caucasus to the to the Balkans. In the Caucasus region, we're working on a pre-feasibility study to look at an undersea electricity cable that would connect Georgia with Romania directly and enable it to trade electricity directly with Europe. Georgia has a large and untapped potential of clean hydroelectric resources, which it seeks to export as an energy export economic development growth strategy. But that's not all in the Caucasus. We're looking very closely and helping Armenia and Georgia look at a interconnection that would allow Armenia to trade electricity into Georgia and then further export it through to Romania, either through the undersea cable or through another interconnection that was commissioned with our support in 2014 that connects Georgia with Turkey. And through that connection, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia could be capable of trading electricity to Turkey and via Turkey through swaps and other financial arrangements into Europe, if not physically as well. This is a map of the Balkans electricity grid, which is very hard to distinguish, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. But I don't know if you all can see it, but the red and green lines that are somewhat thicker in nature are electricity lines that USEA and USAID analyzed, studied through the Energy Technology Governance Program, conducted network analysis, recommended to be funded either to the IFIs or to the utilities within the region, and that were eventually constructed and commissioned. This investment and the investments that we talked about on the previous slide amount to billions of dollars of new transmission investment that enables the region to be better interconnected, both within the region and with Europe, and provides the superhighway through which trade of electricity can be made, through which markets can be aggregated, and by which hopefully will attract the needed investment to refresh and replenish the energy assets in the region. Another example of this is an undersea cable that was constructed between Montenegro and Italy, providing a direct link between the emerging markets, the emerging electricity markets of the Balkans and the growing electricity market of Italy, enabling direct trade. Lastly, I wanted to just leave you with the final thought that one of the biggest challenges in the region is integrating the Europe and Eurasia region with Europe physically through its electrical connections. Here's a map that shows in yellow what's known as the IPS-UPS synchronous zone of electrical connections. And you'll see that Ukraine and Moldova are connected synchronously with Russia and Central Asia in one synchronous connection. This provides obvious threats to Ukraine and Moldova's energy security as it remains connected to Russia. I think Ukraine has as many as 22 direct connections to Russia on its electrical network. We are working to redraw the map, the electricity map of Eastern Europe, by helping Ukraine and Moldova transition from synchronous connection with the IPS-UPS, causing a physical disconnection with IPS-UPS, and a physical integration with the European synchronous zone. For those of you who may be familiar with it, it's known as ENSO-E, or the European Network Transmission System Operators of Electricity. In order for them to do this, in order for this disconnection from Russia to happen and connection to Europe to happen, they have to pass several conditions precedent. They have to ensure that their grid is secure and reliable in the event that there's an emergency, and they don't export instability through interconnected transmission lines to Europe. They have to meet certain environmental criteria, and they have to meet certain market criteria. with our support, the USEA in cooperation with USAID is helping Ukraine and Moldova examine the physical connections, the reliability and security criteria for transmission interconnections with Europe, and providing ongoing technical support. It's a long-term project. It's one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects I think the United States and its European partners have taken on in the post-Cold War period. It's something that will take some time, but it's something that's worth doing. And we have the critical support of the Ukrainian and Moldovan transmission system operators and their governments as we undertake it. So that's a view from the field, some of the work that we've been doing. I think it complemented the policy perspective that Steve did. I appreciate the effort time to share this story with you, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you both very much for great presentations. That's a lot of material you put on the table. So just again to remind the audience that please enter your questions into the Q&A box and I will ask them. I see we already have 3 questions in the box, so let me just start with the first one, and I guess it's to both of the speakers. Has there been resistance from the region when working to tie countries closer together through energy networks? If so, how have they been addressed? How has the resistance been addressed?
Will, do you want me to take that one first to give you a second to maybe rehydrate after your presentation there? So
absolutely.
There's a couple ways to answer that. So yes and no. I told Will I would take it first so I could steal one of his lines. Okay. And so one of Will's lines, right, is that we work at the technical level and wait for the politics to catch up. Okay. So the map that Will put up for Southeast Europe was the evolution of a joint transmission system planning program that we ran through USEA. That program started about 6 months after the end of the Balkan Wars, where we were able to get the technical staff of the respective utilities in the region together to start working together towards a more rational regional development plan. So at the technical level, we have Serbians and Kosovars sitting at the same table. Okay, we in some of our regulatory working groups even managed to get some Azeri and Armenian regulators to sit at the same table. So at a technical level, we get the engineers together and there's really strong collaboration. Now, there are political barriers. One benefit we have is that, at least until recently, the carrot has always been EU accession for our countries. And a lot of these countries have signed what's called the Energy Community Treaty. And that mandates that the countries adopt several European directives, into their national legislation to become part of these broader markets. So that carrot tends to override. But having seen that, you do see resistance from time to time. And that's actually one of the worries that I personally have from my chair is we're seeing a bit of a slowing down or a lessening of enthusiasm for some of these countries to fully integrate into the EU, given recent events. So there's a little bit less urgency in terms of adopting some of these directives and more fully integrating. Now, there's always the market games that are played where embedded system operators in the respective countries are going to try to advantage local generation versus import and so on, right? But maybe, I don't know, Will, if you have more you would want to add to that.
Well, just to build on what you're saying, the people that we're working with are the engineers and practitioners that are operating and planning the networks, and they recognize the benefit of integration just from running and operating the grid from a reliability perspective. If you're operating an electrical system on your own, it's a lot harder to keep the lights on if you have a problem than if you're connected to a neighbor who can help you out in times of need. So in the early stages, we talked about reliability and the importance of working together and tying the region together so that you can maintain your electrical network securely and serve as an ability, use it to attract investment from businesses that need a reliable source of electricity. Later, we were able to demonstrate that not only will you tying yourselves to your neighbors improve your security and reliability of your networks, but you can take advantage of the diverse resources of the region to lower your electricity costs. You have some parts of the region that have different resources than in other parts. You have temporal differences in the use of energy during the day and seasonally. And you can use that to your advantage, but you can only use that to your country's advantage if you're tied together and you can transport that energy from one country to the other. And this has been one of the greatest accomplishments, I think, that Steve's office has been able to encourage, is to transition from an administratively operated sector that focused solely on security and reliability of the industry to one where it now recognizes security and reliability are important, but that it's also important to drive down the cost of energy as much as possible, because they're in a competitive world seeking investment from from industries that use energy intensively.
Okay, thank you. We have some more questions here, so let me go right to the next one. Is cyber-informed decision-making being baked into guidance to beneficiary states seeking IFI support? And again, that can go to either one of you.
Will, do you want to go first? You want me to take that?
I didn't hear the question.
Sorry, I'll read it again. Is cyber-informed decision-making being baked into guidance to beneficiary states seeking IFI support?
Yes, but Steve, maybe you should take the lead on this. I think you're better poised for this.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And I just want to say before I answer that question, what's interesting is I was starting to type in the chat window, one of Will's greatest accomplishments is, and then you said the same thing, but you gave the credit back to my audience, back to my office. So no, it comes out of your program about moving the system to consider economic dispatch as opposed to just reliability and technical standards. There's that. Okay. But cyber has actually been an interesting challenge for us in the region. It's something that we started to institute in 2016, critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And what I can say, into the region where we work, is that there is a dearth of understanding of the real threat. We have a cooperative agreement with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. That group there, working with regulatory agencies, and some of our other implementing parties have been really trying to push our counterparts. And it's not just coming from USAID. It's coming from we're talking about USAID's bottom-up approach here, right? There's also this policy driver, obviously coming from state and other agencies or departments, and it has really been difficult to get, I think, counterparts to address the threat, because it becomes an expense or an expenditure that is not does not have an immediate payback, right? I'm a Chicken Little. I'm an energy security guy. I'm always talking about the problem that might happen. And then if I'm successful, it doesn't happen. And so I have to answer the question about, well, why did we spend this money on this thing that never happened? Okay, so it's an interesting dilemma. And the IFIs to this point have not truly engaged in this issue. They're starting to, and we're engaged in conversations with them, but it's just something that it's an emerging threat. Unfortunately, it's going to probably take a mass system failure before we really truly get people on board. Having said that, I mean, there are some glimmers of hope. I don't know, Will, if you want to speak to some of the work you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, we've constituted a working group on cybersecurity where we can share best practices from Europe and North America with our counterparts in the region. One of the key challenges, I think, in cybersecurity in the region, as Steve mentioned, is just awareness of the C-suite. Despite the fact that Ukraine was attacked and it's a neighbor in the region, it's still not. This cybersecurity is still not seen as an important priority for the C-suite. partly because they're dealing with so many other issues just to keep the lights on. They're dealing with issues of market reform. They're dealing with issues of renewable energy integration, subsidized tariffs, and rooting out corruption. So when you talk to them about a threat that may or may not materialize, it's hard for them to prioritize. The other thing that makes cybersecurity difficult in the region is that you want to be able to share threat intelligence to the maximum extent possible. But you have these cleavages across the region that mitigate or the potential to share these threats because folks don't know exactly who they're sharing the threats with. So this is one of the challenges I think that our program has to overcome as we work on these projects on a regional basis. One of the things we thought to do is to sort of devolve the work from a regional project to a bilateral basis and strengthen the countries on a national basis rather than working through this problem on a regional basis as we do with the other work, the transmission, gas and electric network planning.
Okay, so we have several more questions here. So let me go to the next one, which probably a quick answer. Do you expect any setback or impact of the newly revitalized conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Yes. So if you say for the quick answer, yeah. The border between those two has been closed. That I was going to sort of address this in the first question about markets, but I chose to wait since I saw this question here. So Armenia is in a really precarious position in terms of energy security. It does not have a lot of indigenous resources. It has Lake Savan and some hydro cascades and that come out of the lake, and it has some thermal plants outside of the capital, Yerevan. The thermal plants are reliant on gas supply from Russia and from Iran. And the gas supply lines are largely at least the ones from Russia are largely at maximum capacity. So this speaks to the lower price fuel costs trap I was speaking to earlier. Armenia's borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey are closed. Okay, and so their only methods for evacuating power or obtaining power are through Georgia or through Iran. And so and I didn't mention the aging nuclear power plants, right? This is a big concern for a lot of us, right? It's a power plant without containment. It's past its design life. We would like to see it shut down, but Armenia doesn't have a lot of options. And so, our overall approach has been to try to further ties with Georgia, given the abundant hydropower, and to try to orient Armenia east-west, but using Georgia as a bridge country. So there are concerns. Any kinetic action is always a problem, and this just seems to get us further away from where we want to be. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Will, if you want to add, or if you want to leave that as sufficient and move on to the other questions.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Yeah. So let me jump up into the chat now. Here's a good question. To support energy security in certain E&E countries that depend heavily on coal generation, what has been done to support the transition to natural gas sources or renewable energy sources?
Will, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. That's a really well-informed question, and as I mentioned, the region depends heavily on the coal, and there's a lot of concern in the countries about what happens when you transition from coal, and this causes concerns about their EU accession capabilities and the green energy deal that Europe is pursuing. We're doing a lot of modeling work to examine the potential of the network to absorb renewable energy, to make sure that the network can take this inexpensive source of energy, but one that is intermittent and causes operational problems on the network, and make sure that it's secure and robust enough to be able to accept that. Of course, at this time, it's impossible to transition entirely to renewable energy because of the intermittency nature. The wind sometimes blows at night a lot when you don't need the energy, and then it doesn't blow sometimes on a hot day in the summertime when you need a lot of it. So you're going to need to have base load capacity. And one of the things that we've been looking at is whether or not it will be possible to introduce gas from new sources of supply, from Azerbaijan to TAP and TANAP pipelines and up through the IAP pipeline, and from LNG from the United States and other sources, to provide that baseload capacity that might take the place of the fossil energy from the lignite plants and provide that baseload capacity until there's a time when battery storage is inexpensive enough and proven technology that where renewable sources can be stored on a long-term basis and provide the ability to smooth out the intermittent generation of wind and solar.
Okay, why don't we move on to the next one?
Yeah, okay, please, yeah.
A related question. China controls half of the emerging market debt and does not impose covenants like we do in the West. Russia is copying China and Eurasia. Are we competitive enough on offering financial tools? Today, finance looks like a political weapon.
That's a great question. That's a wonderful question. So to some extent, our response has been the newly established DFC to try to offer a financing arm. The bringing together several of the financing prior U.S. financing outfits under one. But this I think is an existential question that we need to ask going forward. And what I would say is, well, China and Russia don't offer the covenants that we would. They affect do. They're just longer term. It's political control. It's leverage, right? That's downstream, and this becomes a challenge. And I'll just relate an anecdote in that regard. Is we're obviously a little concerned about Huawei and some of the communications technology that's out there. And so what we've been discussing internally is what is our effective response, because the sum total of the program out of my office has to be more than don't install Huawei, right? There has to be the aspect of, well, here's the alternative for you. Right. And so I wish I had a more satisfying answer to that question, other than you've hit the nail on the head, and it is something we are definitely looking at in terms of our assistance posture. So.
Okay, let's go to the next one then. Romania and Turkey occupy pivot positions for energy distribution. How are they suited for these sensitive positions that seem to beg for reliability and good behavior?
Will,
you work really closely with both. You want to go first, and I can add on.
Yeah, I mean I can't speak to the political or the policy sort of nature of this question, but I can say that that both have taken positive steps in the sense of market reform, transparency, and in the reliability of their networks and their ability to transmit electricity and natural gas reliably. And they've proven to be strong and reliable partners in energy trade.
Okay. All right. So I have one more question here. I think it's probably a good question to sort of sum up the morning conversation. So here's the question. What are the three most transformative and innovative developments in the region's energy space? And conversely, what are the three key barriers to achieving these transformations? So I guess looking forward, what do you guys see as the three areas where you really want to do something new and exciting?
Well, I've been asked multiple times, when are we done? Right? Because the role of Right USAID is we want to work ourselves out of a job. Okay. And so what I always respond is, when I see non-recourse project finance for major energy projects, my job is done and I can walk away. And so what do I mean by that? It's bringing the countries together in a large enough market, in a lesser risked market. I've lost the appropriate word there, right? Such that private finance is available. Okay, now that's not an innovation per se, but it's something that we have in the US. I would like to see merchant power generation in the region. I would like to see less state-owned assets, right? That to me is something that the region desperately needs to move forward. And that could be another 3 sessions worth of conversation on how to get there. So I'll leave that aside. As Will mentioned, if we're going to look at it from a technological standpoint, storage technology could be a game changer. Okay, renewables are coming down in price, but there's a lot of hidden costs, especially in inflexible power markets. So there's that aspect. The other thing I would highlight is it's the diversity issue, right? So Will spoke to potential U.S. LNG. What I would say is LNG is great for diversity. It's great for maybe a transition to renewables, but also there's to some extent it just is a negotiating tactic for local countries. If you look at the Baltics, right, Lithuania put in an LNG terminal and it all immediately got a lower price from Russia, right, for natural gas, right, just because of the potential for substitution. So it's, again, being aid, we're always looking at the long slog. Right, we're a development agency. We're not necessarily a research agency. So we're looking at generational issues. So it's hard for me to find 2 or 3 just quick things. But Will, I'm hoping you can save me with something articulate.
Well, I think you've said it very eloquently, Steve. I don't think there's anything I can add to that.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much for excellent presentations, and I hope that this will be the first of many conversations where we incorporate your work and the work at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at GW. There's a lot of areas to talk about here. Energy obviously is an area where politics, geopolitics, technology, society all come together, and so it's all wrapped up into one complex web, and so there's lots of different ways that we could come at these questions. I know at the GW School of Engineering and Applied Science, they're looking at things like microgrids and other new technologies and see how would that fit into the networks you're building, or would that be an alternative? I mean, lots of interesting things to talk about going forward in future sessions. So once again, let me thank both of our presenters, and thank you to the members of the audience for tuning in this morning, and hope that we'll see you in future conversations. So let me end it there, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.